I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am talking with Chris Grigg, founder and multi-instrumentalist for black metal group Woe, and drummer for death metal group Glorious Depravity, who will be releasing their latest record on Transcending Obscurity Records on November the 7th, Death Never Sleeps. And Chris is also the founder of the online music community Ampwall, which, if you have listened to or watched the last episode of the podcast with Caroline Harrison, you will have heard us discussing. And so the big reveal is that Chris was indeed the next person I was going to be talking to. And in the way that I like these kind of 6 degrees of separation, this episode with Chris is essentially thanks to Caroline. The episode with Caroline was thanks to Gregory Jacobson of Lovely Little Girls. And the Gregory Jacobson episode was thanks to Tommy Meehan of Squid Pisser. And in fact, the Tommy Meehan episode was thanks to Dan at Discipline PR, who in fact is the person who organized the very first episode of the podcast with Pete Stahl of Scream. So that's just all incidental. But anyway, as you would expect, this conversation does involve talking quite a fair bit about Ampwall. So for anyone who's interested in understanding why Chris decided to create the platform and what it's all about, then there is no better person to be talking to than him. And it is also good timing that Glorious Depravity just recently announced the release of the forthcoming album. So that is indeed what I will be playing a track from at the end of this episode, with a little clip coming up momentarily. If you're watching the video version of this, you might think to yourself, this is a new environment. And indeed, it is. I am not staying at a friend's house or any relative's house. I am in accommodation in Phuket because I'm here for 2 weeks to train Thai boxing. But will that get in the way of me putting out weekly episodes of the podcast? No, it will certainly not do that. So I was training Muay Thai today. I'll be training Muay Thai tomorrow from 7:30 in the morning. It is currently coming up to 10:30 at night here. I'd better go to bed soon, but I will just finish with this introduction. So you can pre-order the forthcoming record from Glorious Depravity on Bandcamp, but you can also pre-order it from Ampwall. And you can find my music on Ampwall and on Bandcamp in various different places. And other than that, I will put all relevant various links into the description. You can follow me on all social media at Tom Osman Sounds. You can go to my website, tomosmansounds.com, to get various links to my music and also my writings on my music. And that's it. Oh, no, it's not it, because Glorious Depravity have also got some live dates coming up. So the band will be on tour from the middle of November. There are dates from the 15th, potentially, or the 16th. I will put, basically, if you go to the band's Instagram page, I believe there should be information about the live shows. But yeah, it's still a little while away. But as the album is announced, and I'm going to play a track from it, it is worth knowing. And that, I believe, is everything. So, without further ado, Chris Grigg of Woe, Glorious Depravity, and Ampwall, take it away. How you doing?
All right, man. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, it is exceptionally windy here at the moment. Just before I got on this call, I looked out my window and I saw one of the bins outside just surfing down the street.
Take off. Take off. It's gone.
That's it.
Where are you?
I'm in Glasgow in Scotland.
Oh, nice.
Have you been to Scotland before?
Yeah, we played Edinburgh last year.
Oh, right. Okay. With Woe.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my only time. It was absolutely incredible. Like unbelievable. Just the drive and like we didn't, we were there like, we got there in the afternoon and then we were there and we left the next day. So I didn't really get to spend much time there, but we were staying in like an old part of the city and we got to wander around a little bit. And I mean, it's just beautiful, beautiful. Can't wait to come back.
Nice. And so, like, before that, how much had you played shows and toured outside of the US?
Um, Not a huge amount. We had done, it was our second European tour. The first one was maybe, I don't know, I think 2016, 2017 was when we were last in Europe. And then we've played in Canada a bunch. But beyond that, that's it.
Yeah. And what did you find about in terms of the distances? Like, does it seem very different when you're in Europe and, the distance from one place to another compared to traveling around in the US?
Depends on, in the US, it really depends on the region that you're in. When you're in the Northeast, you can hit a new city every, max 3 hours. If you're going from, if you go from, I mean, really from like Providence, Maine, you can go, Providence to Boston, like Providence to Boston to New York to Philly to Richmond to Raleigh. And I don't think you'll have a drive, unless you're hitting rush hour or something, you probably won't have a drive that's like longer than like 3 hours, maybe
Yeah.
three and a half. So it's really not bad. And then I think that was more or less, but then, well, I should say, then if you're out on, if you're on the West Coast, it can be a little bit further. If you're trying to get from the East Coast to the West Coast of the U.S., there's just like a demilitarized zone in the center of the country, and there's nothing there. Um, and then in Europe, we didn't really have too many really bad drives. There was one, maybe 6, 7 hours. So it was for the most part it was fine. It was fine, and then yeah.
So I was gonna ask you this question later, but as we've started talking about playing and touring, so as part of this book that I want to write, I'm thinking that I'm actually going to come to the US at a certain point, in part to like meet people in person that I've talked to or meet other people in person I haven't talked to. But I also thought it would be good for me to get a sense because I talk to people in various different countries, but as you might imagine, a lot of music ends up sort of orbiting around the US one way or another. And obviously, a lot of bands that are prominent in lots of different areas that I'm interested in are from the US. So I was thinking it would be interesting to come to the US, but also there are a few particular places I want to go to. Like I want to go to Chicago. I actually want to go to Portland as well. And I was thinking, well, if I'm, once I start thinking, well, I want to go to this place and that place, it kind of makes sense to see as many places as possible. Now, to your point about the East Coast and the West and not so much in the middle, I'm curious from your point of view. Let's say if I were to come over and I would go like, right, I've got 2 weeks, I've got 3 weeks, I've got 4 weeks. There are places in the East that I want to see. There are places in the West that I want to see. And potentially there might be things in between. How feasible is it to go everywhere by car and to just decide I'm not no that's an
Well, okay,
instant
let me.
no.
You didn't get the finish. So and just decide what was the qualifier there?
Um, well, I mean, and how long would everything take? I mean, I'm not gonna punish myself just for the sake of the premise. I suppose I would like to be able to travel by car as much as possible, partly because I'm sort of curious, for a band that we're choosing to do a tour. I'm sure there must be bands that go like, we are going to go along the East and the West Coast and potentially other places, and it's all going to be on the road.
Yes. Yes, but you wouldn't do East and West Coast in 2 weeks. That's not feasible. Like maybe I don't think that's feasible at all. I think you'd want to pick a coast. You'd want to do it one of two ways. You'd either pick a coast and stay on the coast, or you would fly out somewhere in there and then you would do a few days on the other side.
Yeah. Do you think that like 3 weeks is a reasonable amount of time?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. 3 weeks. Yes.
So, like on the topic of touring, one of the things I was going to ask you was about how directly you've been involved with like booking shows and booking tours over the years.
Yeah. So, I've been doing it for a long time, and I've done it all the ways you can think of, from booking it myself to being a fly on the wall while someone else in the band is booking it, to my having an agent who's booking it, to being on a tour where somebody else's agent books it and we just sort of tag along. Most recently, so our most recent tour was back in June, so just 2 months ago. And I booked that. That was my first DIY tour that I personally booked in many years, easily more than a decade. And yeah, yeah. So and I that went really well. I really loved that experience. There's a lot of pros and cons to working with somebody versus just doing it yourself. In this case, going DIY was the right move, and I'm glad that we did it. But it's not always practical. It depends. Like I can't do a DIY tour in Europe. We need somebody to book it. I don't have the contacts. I don't know the logistics. So we can't do that ourselves. But yeah, so there's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot that could be said.
Now, let's say if we were going to go right back for you to the first point that you were booking any shows. Obviously, if we go far back enough, you didn't have any contacts. So how did you sort of get started booking shows at all to the point that you could then, know people that would be relevant in the future?
Well, so being able to book shows was the direct result of making friends, like making contacts ahead of time. So for the most part, I mean, I didn't go in totally cold. Totally cold would be band that has released no music that nobody has ever heard of, and a person who's like a total stranger who's reaching out to other strangers, which is a thing you can do, right? And sometimes you reach out to somebody for a show and they've never heard of your band, and it doesn't matter that I mean, I'm saying you in the like a third person, but it could be me. Like I've reached out to people who've never heard of my band. It doesn't matter that I've been around for almost 20 years. Like they come from a different scene or they're a lot younger than me, and they came up as I was like we were between albums or whatever, so they're unfamiliar with us. So it doesn't really matter. So it just happens, but there's a good enough. I don't know. There's a large enough network of people where there's a large network, but it's a small world. So even when, for the most part, even when somebody hasn't heard of my band, they know somebody who can vouch for us, or we have mutual friends or something like that. But again, I'm getting away from your early question, from your question about like how did I get started doing this? And it really, in my case, it started with people who it started super hyper local, right? Hyper local. So it was my town, surrounding towns, and it was made a friend by going to shows, asked them to put our band on the show, met other people who were playing the show, and got invited to play their shows, and then it was just friends of friends of friends. At a certain point, internet came around, and then it was a lot of exchanging emails, buying merch from a band, and chatting with them through email. And yeah, and then it was kind of the same thing. It's you get friendly with somebody through shared interests, and either they're booking something and ask you to come down, or you tell them you're looking for a show and ask if they can help you out.
That all makes a lot of sense. And how, like, through that whole kind of process, how much of that was sort of like a trial and error process versus like people actually saying to you, oh, this is kind of the way to go about things?
It's been such a long time. It's hard to say. I mean, I think it felt pretty organic. I over the years, I definitely got tips from friends who are more experienced, and from working with booking agents, or working with more pro friends. You learn certain things about just about like how direct you should be, like how direct and upfront you should be about like, things like money, and how clear you need to be about dates, and how frequently you should follow up with people, and the kinds of records you should keep, and the kinds of information you should expect to have, a month before the tour, a week before the tour, a couple days before the show. There are certain things that you learn about the organizational side, kind of along the way, or just from seeing people do it better than you. But there's no, I think everybody is going to approach things a little bit differently, and you kind of, I don't know, you kind of just you, you get better at it over time if you're deliberate. I guess that's true for most things.
Yeah. I mean, definitely from my own experience, not for booking shows, but in various aspects of life and work, like, of course, it's great to get good guidance and good advice, but a lot of stuff, there really is no substitute for just experiencing it for yourself and going like, right, okay, that
Yeah,
works or that doesn't work, and
no,
that's going to influence what I do next time round.
for sure, for sure, absolutely, absolutely, and yeah, and then there's a lot of luck. There's a lot of luck that goes into it. There's a lot of meeting the right person at the right time who is booking the right event or has the right venue or there are the right local bands in the area or you know people you wind up with kind of counterparts in different cities who just happen to be in the right place at the right time where it's like this makes sense. My favorite example of this back around when Woe started playing, this was like 2008, maybe 2009. MySpace was really popular, and there were a few message boards for like people kind of in like the East Coast and the Northeast. And I wound up becoming friends with Mike Paparo from Inner Arma and Bastard Sapling, his black metal band. And I met Mike, and then I met Mike Hill from Tombs, and I met Paul from Black Anvil again. And there were all of these bands that were kind of getting started right around the same time who sounded similar enough. Mutilation Rites, another great example. Like we all were kind of starting at the same time, playing music that was similar enough that we could all play shows together. Like culturally, it all just made sense, and it was all happening at the same time. So when we started playing shows, we were able to come up to New York. We were able to go down to Richmond. We were able to help them when they came up, and it was kind of just like a sort of cultural moment in time where everything just sort of came together, and we just happened to be living at the time and the place where these things were happening.
Yeah. So you mentioned that being like about 2008, 2009 with Woe. So you started Woe initially as a solo project in 2007, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So at that time, like I understand that, you play drums in some bands, play guitar, you sing, I guess you play bass as well sometimes. So at that time when you started the band, were you like, you felt that you were proficient in all the different instruments that you wanted to have as part of this project?
Yeah. 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 I felt good enough at them, you know.
Had you, I guess you'd been playing in various other bands before
Oh
you
yeah.
started that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, my first band, I was probably like 1998, maybe. I started playing drums right around 98. And I had been playing guitar for a few years, and yeah, and I kind of like went back and forth between those instruments for a long time. Put the guitar away for many years, and picked it up, a couple years before I started working on Woe. But at that time, I was good enough to get the job done, and determined enough to not let my own shortcomings stop me. There's just a lot of tenacity required for it. And yeah, I figured it out. I figured it out. I got better over the years for sure.
And what was kind of like the driving impetus at the time that you did decide to create Woe as a project?
So, I mean, the main thing was I was really, and you'll have to bear with me because it's been a long time, but the main things that I remember were just sort of kind of just wanting to have my own space to create this music that I wanted to hear without really having to compromise or run at anybody else's pace. You know, working with other people can be tough. And for a band to really be everything it can be, you really need kind of magical combination of people, similar to what we were saying about music scenes and how you kind of need to just have a group of people in the same place at the same time, who happen to be doing the same thing. You kind of need that with a band too. And sometimes, you can get like, one strong personality who could just sort of like pull everyone else along. But at the time, I was just like, I just wanted to do my own thing and make this music that I wanted to hear at my own, really at my own pace, which tends to be a little more intense than a lot of people could really want to go.
But then, having gone into it with that intention, it didn't take that long from the outside until you'd actually put a whole band around it. So, how did you get from it being a solo project to being a band?
Yeah, I mean it's the same as anything else. Just met the right people at the right time. It was we were offered a show, really like a potential show. There was somebody who told me they were trying to bring a band over from Europe, and they really wanted us to play. And this was after the album had been out, and I really liked the idea of I had warmed to the idea of playing live, and it was like, if we can pull it off at this level, if we can recreate a version of this recording live, let's give it a shot. And I had met some guys who were really into the idea. I joined their band, they joined mine, and the idea was, it was just like, oh, let's do like a show or two, let's do a couple of shows, and then you guys will just be the live band, and I'll keep going with this thing on the album. And then it just sort of, it grew or spiraled, whichever way you want to go from there.
And so, when you signed to Stronghold, was that the first label that Woe had to
Yeah,
deal with?
yeah, I haven't thought of that in a long time. Yes,
Was that the
yes.
first dealings that you had with a label?
Hmm. I I don't know. I mean, signed is a really strong word. There was no contract there.
Yeah.
So I think the relationship there was similar to one. I had one other release prior to that a label was involved with, which was a 7-inch from an old band. And both of them were just handshake deals of, send me some files, and send me some files, send me some artwork, I'll put your album out. I think that was the first one that I had dealt with. Yeah. I mean, like the first one that I had personally dealt with, right? Like the other one was, I was the drummer in the band, and he was a buddy of ours, and it just kind of happened. This was the first time that I was dealing with a person in a label that I didn't know.
Yeah, it's funny, like from the outside and like growing up as a music fan, whenever I saw like a record label, whether it was like a major label, so to speak, or an independent label, I guess I had this concept that like, yeah, you have a contract with a label and then like you have like an X number of album deal. In my very, very limited experience with working with labels, and I've worked with one, it was essentially just going like, yeah, here's this album, would you like to put it out? And they're like, yep, it's going to be on this format, and then it's released. There is no contract, so to speak. But I'm guessing that when you went to Candlelight, then that was a different
Oh yeah,
story.
sure was. Sure was. Yeah, Candlelight was a different beast. Candlelight was that traditional contract multi-album deal, terms, sold them publishing rights, and all of that whole thing. So that was a very different animal.
And what was that experience like? When you went into that process going like, ooh, like we're maybe going to sign with this label, did you have like people that you could go to and go like, is this a good contract?
I happened to befriend a gentleman who at the time was doing contract and legal advisory, I guess we'd say. He wasn't an attorney, but he worked for labels for a really long time, so he knew how these contracts work and what was possible to ask for, and what was possible to do. So he reviewed it, and he had a pre-existing relationship with the label, so he had like a boilerplate red-lined contract that they had already approved in the past. So he started with that. He took theirs and he's like, here's the ULA version of it. Boom. And he had that. And so that was ultimately what we went with. And he got us, a little bit more money and some additional protections for us, some additional terms. And yeah, so that wound up being very important. But it was a different, it's a different process, and I came away from it with very mixed feelings about that whole system that might be the result of dealing with just having not a great relationship with a label. Like I don't know that my experience is representative of the way these things always go. But it was not, it wasn't at the time. It wasn't the best fit.
So, what impact do you think that had after you stopped working with that label in terms of your relationships with other labels after that?
Well, it's like getting out of any bad relationship. You come out and you kind of got a chip on your shoulder, and you're like, I'm never gonna have my heart broken again, and you kind of look at things with maybe an unwarranted hostility, or maybe it is warranted. I don't know. We never signed we still haven't signed another contract. We've been offered, we had opportunities, but at the time I wasn't willing to sign away the rights. I mean, the missing piece here is that Candlelight was sold to Universal Spine Farm Records sometime after our second album. So, or our second album with the label, right? So, we did the first one on this like DIY label, essentially DIY, like independent label, like very independent label. Then we did albums. We signed with Candlelight before we did album two, so we did albums two and three with them, and that would be Quietly and Dramatically in Withdrawal. And then so there was a third album option in there. They weren't super happy with us in general. Like even if Candlelight hadn't been sold, I don't think they would have. I think they would have dropped us anyway. We weren't a great fit. We didn't want to tour the way they wanted us to. I was a pretty bad sport about things like press photos. Like I thought that image was stupid, and I was like, I'm not taking, like I'll give you like three pictures. Like I'm not doing pictures. Like, which is now I have a different attitude about it. But at the time, I was just like, no, music is the only thing that matters. Like, stop asking me to take pictures. Like, whatever. And they just didn't. They had a European black metal sensibility that was just like, what are you talking about, man? So it just didn't go well. And then the albums were. I mean, whether the albums are good or not isn't for me to say. But so I think they were going to drop us anyway. But then they were acquired by Candlelight Records in the process. Or I'm sorry, Candlelight was acquired by Spine Farm Universal. In the process, they transferred my contract to them. They did all these things, and we didn't know anything about it until I started seeing press releases. I started reading about it in the press that like our label had been sold and our contract had been sold with that. So it took a little while for me to find a contact, and I had to email someone. And I was like, "Hey, my name is Chris. You own my music." And then shortly after that, they were like, "Yeah, we're gonna end this contract." But what that meant was that they owned the rights to release my music. They refused to sell my rights back to me. They refused to grant me a license to my music. And this was, I had Woe had three albums at the time. They had two-thirds of my music. They had two-thirds of my artistic identity spanning probably a decade. Like this was serious. And whether or not the music was going to be, I'm not going to like win a Grammy for it. I'm not going to, like it's not going to, whether or not it's going to change the world doesn't matter. This is like my art. They wouldn't. I didn't have any access to it. So that hit me, that was a bad feeling, and really left me with like a bit of a chip on my shoulder about the experience. And they were pretty upfront about like, yeah, we're not going to do anything with this. Like we're just going to let it sit. Like we're not going to release it. Like we're not going to, we're not going to promote it. We're not going to do anything. It's just going to be in the catalog, and the implication there is like, maybe one day if you go on to do something big and suddenly people are interested in your back catalog, this will have value. But the value, that losing the opportunity cost to them was more valuable than the, 1,500 or 3 grand that I would toss them to get my rights back. Like, the opportunity cost was like, well, what if it's worth 100 times that? In the end, I recently I was able to get the rights back to my music, and to Woe's music, because it's the band's, not mine. And so we were able to get it back because of some details in our contract. But for a long time, that really like left me like, fuck labels, like we're never doing this again. And as a result, it kind of cuts off, there's like a whole industry in place to help artists do things. And whether or not it's in the best interest of the artists and who's benefiting there is like kind of a whole other conversation. But there are seemingly options available there are certain people who just will not work with you if you don't have a contract.
That's a very interesting insight. So, like, having had that experience and having seen things from that side, now that you don't want to repeat that, what does that mean for you in terms of how you put music out with Woe or with anyone else?
So for the two albums and the EP after that, we went back to the underground, back to handshake agreements. We were really, really, really fortunate to link up with Vendetta Records in Germany, and Stefan is just the real deal through and through, end to end, straight shooter, very direct, very clear, means what he says, does what he says. And he takes no ownership of our music, of any of his band's music. And if you ask him, I remember early on, I'd be like, hey man, is it okay with you if I handle, putting this on streaming services, and I'm gonna list it on my own bandcamp and sell it directly and stuff. And his response every single time would be, it's your music. You can do with it whatever you think is right. Like, I support you. Whatever you want to do, I support you always. And he really does. So that was really good. But when you're working with smaller labels, it does mean, smaller footprint, smaller promotion, less marketing, less name recognition, different. I mean, he has, a lot of, labels of that size have good distribution, which is to say that a store can, in the US maybe, like, can acquire the record for sell in retail, but without, kind of the name recognition, without the larger pro bands, et cetera, et cetera. It's kind of like easier for things to get lost, as opposed to, at least in theory, a larger label that wants a contract, but because they have a contract and they've given you some more money up front, they have more riding on it, and they have, maybe they have a larger team working full time, maybe they have in-house PR, maybe they have, other large pro bands on the label who will take you on tour or whatever. They can make more connections and so on and so forth. A lot of that stuff becomes, a lot of it is speculation. I have plenty of friends who are on labels that we would think of as very large, who candidly tell me that, like, yeah, man, they don't do anything for me, and they don't promote us at all, and they don't care that we're there. And they might be a household name, but like, we're the littlest band on the label. They don't care about us. So there's no guarantee that being on the big name label with the big contract is going to do anything for you. At the time with Candlelight, I remember thinking that, like, like, oh, this, like, it didn't change my life at all. Didn't change anything for us. It, yeah. But then we also didn't want to, we didn't want to work with them the way they wanted us to. So who's to say, like, we might have left a lot of value on the table. Going forward for us, I think I'm trying to be a better sport and more reasonable about things. But I think the industry has changed a lot. From what I can tell, there are a lot more licensing deals where you'll work with the label and the label will release it, but you get the rights to your music back after some term of 10 years or 15 years or something, which for me is fine. That's the main piece for me. It's like, I want to know that the music that I make isn't going to be locked up somewhere forever.
It does seem a lot more
That's
reasonable,
all.
like it's not holding bands or artists to ransom.
Yeah, yeah, and you see this a lot. I mean, and there are some labels that are notorious for this, and there are a lot of bands who you'll see they'll re-record an old album, and fans will be like, "Why are you recording it? The original version is better." And they can't come out and say we're re-recording it because this label, has us locked up in a contract, and they won't give us the rights back to our album. But sometimes that is a thing that happens, and it's very unfortunate. Taylor Swift did it, like most famously. She's re-recording her music for this exact reason, and it's really, it's hurtful. It sucks, but yeah, it sucks. But I again, like I also have friends who have had good experiences with this, and people on the inside have told me like, yeah, man, like you guys just had a bad experience. I don't like this. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. As another kind of like still with this sort of practical, largely financial topic, I do like interview people for other like for magazines, websites, whatever. So like sometimes I talk to people who are like on major labels, for example, but most of the time I'm talking with people who are on a fairly kind of like DIY underground level. And so I think more often than not, people that I talk to don't financially support themselves, at least entirely, from the music that they're making. And in general, I would imagine that, if you're making music that is somewhat extreme or avant-garde or abrasive, obviously, like, we've got the examples like Cannibal Corpse, where they can turn into some kind of institution, or Meshuggah, maybe. But I guess for you, that you've always had something else that you've been supporting yourself with, but maybe that's been within the music world.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've always, I've always had, something else has always been my job, and that's true for just about everyone I know, and even for the guys who are doing it full time, it's a tough existence, and when they're not touring, when they're between albums, they are often like looking for work to get them by. But yeah, I mean, I've always worked in software. I've always worked with technology in some way. But I think, personally, I think there is a certain amount of freedom that comes from that. It lets you work at your own schedule, and it lets you make the music that really moves you without having to be concerned or prioritizing sales and commercial viability and keeping the label and stakeholders happy. Me being who I am, like I like having goals and tracking, I don't know, data and having plans. So I tend to look at, I like to think about, sales numbers and whatever data I can get to evaluate my own performance. But that's just because I'm a freak. That's not out of any sense of obligation to like a third party. That's really just like I like to know that I'm making some kind of progress, so I'm going to use like the measures of progress that I can. Um, and it's still all secondary to, do I feel fulfilled by this? Is this the album that I want to put out? Does it hit the goals that I want it to hit artistically?
And this is a slightly philosophical question, but in a very fundamental sense, why, if you could sort of pinpoint it for yourself, why do you create?
Oh, because I have to. Because I have to. I have to. There's no, because if I don't, I don't feel complete. I don't. It's hard to say, but I have to be making things at all times. Um, yeah, and sometimes I've taken some breaks from it, but I always channel it into something else. So if I'm not, making music with Woe, I'm writing software. If I'm, like, and to me, it's all these are all like um, creative outlets. They're all taking this like raw material and combining it into these little building blocks and just building this thing that gets bigger and bigger until it's something that stands independently of the atoms that created it. But yeah, I mean, I'm compelled to. I don't know. I'm when I'm not, I'm a very uh, more restless uh, person.
Yeah, it's funny. I've definitely said to people at numerous times over the years, oh, I always need to be creating something, but it's like it could be lots of different things. But one interesting observation I had recently is that I reached a point where I was spending so much of my time where I'm not working my main job that I do, where it'd be like, okay, I'm writing an article or I'm doing a podcast episode, or I'm editing a podcast episode, or I'm doing a review. Like it was always something of that sort that's like, I love this stuff. It's amazing for me to be able to talk to people about music and to get these insights and to get to like be part of this world. But I realized like, oh, this is actually maybe not exactly the same kind of satisfaction as like creating some music myself. So I realized like, oh, okay, like, yeah, I actually still need to have space for that. Like that satisfies a certain urge that isn't satisfied otherwise.
Absolutely, absolutely. I can definitely relate to that. I mean, I do these days. I'm really fortunate to be connected to music through a lot of different paths. So if I'm not writing, if I'm not writing music for Woe, I'm drumming in Glorious Depravity, or if I'm not doing that, I'm doing a lot of mixing these days. And I founded Ampwall, and I'm writing code and working directly with artists every single day, trying to help them feel some sense of joy and fulfillment in this, kind of like dystopian digital world we all kind of seem to find ourselves in. So, but it's there's a creative, they all have like a certain creative thread that runs through them, but they're not, it's not quite, excuse me, it's not quite the same. Nothing, nothing can replace, writing a song. Nothing can replace being on stage. It's not the same.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I feel that for sure.
Now, I wanted to transition to talking about Ampwall, and you just very conveniently brought it up. So I spoke with Caroline a bit about the platform, and she had lots of very positive things to say. She also mentioned that there was a point where you were kind of like bringing it up vaguely with certain people, but it's like you weren't quite at the point that you could really talk about it officially. So it seems
Yeah.
that this was like something that you had in the pipeline for a while. So maybe you can kind of tell me the origins, like what was the sort of background to you making the decision that you wanted to start this platform, and how did that come to fruition?
Yeah. I like so many other things, I've been releasing music in whatever formats I can for a really long time. And, I've been, I've used Bandcamp like everyone else. And even before Bandcamp, I had built my own kind of pay what you want music purchase download system. And this was like right after the first Woe album came out in like 2007. So I've always been kind of, trying to find ways to let my music exist in the world online. And then sometime 2022, I guess, um, after after Bandcamp had been sold to Epic Games, which was their first of two sales, I had this moment where I was just sort of reflecting on the the state of the digital world for musicians, and it really hit me that there were no truly independent options left for releasing music to the world.
So just a quick question in the midst of all of that. So
Yeah.
that sort of consideration of the fact that there were no truly independent platforms, this is after Bandcamp got bought out by Epic.
Yep. Yeah. So there were no truly independent options, right? And which is to say that the bigger issue there is that there were no options that I felt had interests that were aligned with me. When a large, like you think about like who owns the music platforms, there's Spotify and Google, and like Google owns YouTube, which is like probably like the biggest discovery engine next to Spotify these days. You have Google, you have Spotify, you have Apple, like you have Tidal and so on and so forth. And now Bandcamp is owned by Epic Games, and it was just there's who is out there whose interests align with us. And then separately from that, I was feeling frustrated by the amount of fees that I was seeing. Whoa, we would sell stuff and they were taking this like big chunk of our sales. But I had this feeling that, man, like this system hasn't changed in years. And at the time, I was working at a company called Shippo that does shipping software for e-commerce. So I was really thinking a lot about like the shipping experience and the value that adds, and thinking about like, man, like Bandcamp, like shipping merch on Bandcamp is just like the worst thing. Really so bad, and it doesn't have to be. And it got me thinking more about like, well, there are a lot of things on Bandcamp that are bad, and they don't have to be. And somewhere along the line, they really stopped trying to make it better. And so on this one hand, there was like me, software engineer, saying like, this thing is not as good as it could be. I build software. I would like to try. I think I could build something that at least solves the problems that I'm having. Separately, philosophically, I don't trust all of the players here. I think that it's wrong and it's bad that like independent music is wholly owned and lives entirely by the graces of these companies whose motives are unclear and don't sync up with people like me. So being a lunatic, I decided like, yeah, I'm gonna just try and I'm gonna build like I have the skills to build this. I'm gonna start building my own stuff. So in January of 2023, I started building this kind of as a nights and weekends project while I was working full time. And the goal there, Woe had an album coming out at the end of September 2023. So my goal there was I want to have something up and running that I can use to sell merch alongside Bandcamp by the time the album comes out. It'll be a good deadline. It'll keep me focused on it. And then, so throughout the year, I was just chipping away at it. I was focused on merch initially, and then I just was going to add in digital audio alongside of it, always using myself as the guinea pig, and just making sure that it met the goals that I had. And it's funny that Caroline remembers me not really wanting to talk about it because yeah, I was pretty cagey about it, not because I thought like, oh, if I talk loudly about this, somebody is going to steal it. Really, it's because I I don't have I don't have a lot of superstitions, but I guess the closest I do come to a superstition is that I think that talking about something before it exists can like ruin it or can damage it or spoil it. I don't like naming like I won't name a band that doesn't have songs written. Like I don't want to hear about the name of a band that doesn't have a song written. Like it's when my wife was pregnant with both of our girls, we wouldn't tell people what we planned on naming them until they were born. Like we told her sisters and some family. We wouldn't say it out loud. I'm just like weirdly superstitious about like you don't name things that don't exist. It puts your priorities in the wrong order. And I did think of a name, but I didn't want to tell people like I'm doing this thing. It's going to be awesome because I want to show, not tell. So yeah. So and I started telling some like close friends and Caroline, someone. And then throughout the year, I was working on this more and more. It was taking up more and more kind of cycles of my brain, and I was reaching a crossroads where I decided it was time for me to move on from my job, and I could either pursue a new job with another software company, or I could commit myself to this and really, really see how far we could take this and see what I could do, and if we could make this like a sustainable thing that can like really help the world and challenge Bandcamp and be my job. So with my wife's support, she encouraged me to like, you know what, like don't get into a new thing where you're just going to be thinking about this other thing all the time and like regretful about it. Just go for it. Just go for it. Like we'll figure out. We'll survive. Like we'll limp along. We have some savings and whatever. Like we'll just do this for a while, and we'll have a couple-year plan, and we'll go for it. And then so that was September 1st, 2023. The fourth Woe album, fifth Woe album, Legacies of Frailty, came out end of September. I think it was like September 29th, maybe 24th, 29th, something like that. The day before the Woe album came out, it was announced that Bandcamp had been sold a second time. And the world's like everything caught fire and everyone was just freaking out because Bandcamp had now been sold a second time in 18 months to this company that nobody had heard of. Nobody knew what the deal was, but it didn't bode well. Everyone was freaking out that, oh man, like this is such a bad sign. And I went, I remember getting into bed the night before and I said to my wife, I was like, look, I know we said we weren't going to announce yet. I know we said we were going to wait and do like a slow, soft launch with Woe. And I had been like posting links to the merch page through like Woe Instagram for a while, just be like, hey, if you want shirts, like get some shirts here. And like we had some sales by then. And I had made up like the simplest landing page just to have something, like, and it was already in place. So like all these things were in place. And like, so we're getting into bed the night before. And I was like, look, like tomorrow's the day. Tomorrow's the day. It's the day my album comes out. Tomorrow, it has to be. This is the moment. Like this is what people are worried about. People are talking about how there's no alternatives and there's nothing else out there. I have this thing. I'm working on it. Tomorrow's the day we announce. So I posted about it on Twitter, and it kind of blew up. It got a lot of attention. My little mailing list kind of exploded. I got a lot of messages from people and a lot of interest. And, I just happened to be in the right place. This is again, like going back to this thing we keep saying, like happened to be in the right place at the right time, doing this thing that happened to be what everyone suddenly there was a lot of interest in this thing. And, so since then I've just continued doing it. It's not that complicated. Like I've just continued building along the way. I've been really lucky to find some more collaborators and some more people to join up who could contribute at the level I am. And we're still we have a lot of users now. We have a lot of albums. We have a lot of interest. It's pretty much in most ways, other than the people involved, it's self-sustaining. But all of our cloud costs at this point are paid for by the system. So we're working hard to build something that's like sustainable, that can outlive us as individuals. And yeah, and it's going really well.
And beyond the ethical side, for people who are wondering what like I'm going to say a terrible businessy thing, the user experience is like on Ampwall,
sure.
How would you describe it? I mean, the thing is as well, even though I feel like a lot of people who either watch this podcast or listen to it are going to be familiar with Bandcamp, I know that as well, like a lot of people don't even know Bandcamp. So
they have no idea. Yeah.
So in relatively simple terms, what is Ampwall and what does it facilitate?
Yeah. So the key to Ampwall is that it's direct. I mean, if we look at it from like the monetary, the economic side, it's ways for fans to directly buy from artists. So it's merch stores and digital audio stores. And when you buy, the artist is fulfilling it. The artist controls the content that's up there. They can sell their music. You can buy downloads. You can download in various formats. You can build a library. You have pages where the artists can express themselves, pages where the fans can express themselves. And through that, you get a lot of options for discovering new music and really creating digital representations of music communities that exist out in the world. And that there's an ethos to it that is a really foundational difference between us and Bandcamp. Bandcamp presents themselves as an online record store. We present ourselves as online music communities. And record stores are part of that. And, selling is part of that. But for a music community to thrive, you have to do more than just sell stuff. And that's because music communities are so much more than people selling crap and people buying crap. And I'm saying crap, obviously, I'm not trying to disrespect anyone, but you get what I mean, right? So music communities are people who are interviewing people who are writing about music and thinking about music, talking about music, and helping all of us feel a closer connection to culture. It's visual artists like Caroline. It's people who are booking shows. It goes on and on and on. And a thing that's really clear once you start looking for it and thinking about it is that nowhere online um, do you see like a social network or a platform or a community that gives space for all of these different identities, right? You get a thing like Bandcamp where you have people selling stuff, people buying stuff. You get all the visual artists, they wind up on Instagram, and then you've got all the journalists and people writing about it, they wind up in other places. But the music, the places that if you tell somebody name music platforms, they're going to name things that are focused on people making sound, people consuming sound. Everyone else is a second class citizen. Everyone else is othered. Everyone else is excluded. And then even the people who are included are, especially in these days of Spotify, they are really beholden to algorithms and they are beholden to these tech companies whose motives just don't sync up with ours. Spotify is a volume business, right? Spotify does not exist to compete with the iTunes downloading store or Bandcamp. Spotify exists to compete with torrents, competes with SoulSeek, it competes with illegal downloading, and it's a volume business. The people who win are the people who are cranking out material and getting the most plays monthly. That is at odds with artists who take a lot of time to create work, artists who meditate on what they're building, artists who release an album every few years. They're cut out. The system is not for them. It's not for the little guys who have, a handful or even a couple hundred or even a couple thousand dedicated fans. It's not for any of us. It's for those guys. Instagram, even the artists, even the people who are othered, right? Even the people who are not welcome on Bandcamp, not welcome on Spotify, they're living on Instagram where you are beholden to the algorithm. Your work has value as long as the algorithm wants to surface it. And it's true of journalists, it's true of podcasters. You go on Facebook and you post about like a podcast, you edited and you worked an amazing interview. It's only going to do as well as the algorithm allows it to do. And then once something new comes out, it's gone. It's gone, right? And it's up there on a page, but like it's really hard to get traction and get people to pay attention to it. So we see part of like a big part of our job is to build spaces where people can, where artists, which includes podcasters, can create these spaces where they can present the things that they have worked about, add context for why it's important to them, create a directory of like the successes along the way, like a really it seems like a subtle thing, but it's kind of not. Like on our album pages, if you're a band, you add an album, we have a dedicated section for press links, right? We have a dedicated section on the page where you can add in links to people who are writing about it, or interviews or reviews or whatever. So that way, over the course of like the promotion of an album, album cycle ends, those links traditionally would get posted to Facebook or they would get posted, in Instagram stories, and then they'd be gone. At least there is one place where you can collect them and you can look at it, and I can look at the the Legacies of Frailty, the last WoW album page, and I can see all of these links, and I can be like, this makes me happy. The mobile app that we're building, those links can show up in the mobile app. So when somebody is listening to the music, they can then go and look at your page and they can read more about the music that they're listening to. And these different pieces of the music community can all sync up somewhere, as opposed to only existing in these totally like isolated, segmented places. And it doesn't mean that people are going to stop using social media. It doesn't mean that there's no value to putting these in front of people. The world is changing, new things are coming out. But it does mean that it gives us these little spaces where things are more quiet and more focused and more controlled, and just like that cacophony of that new release hype is quieter, where a community can be built that also values these things. So little by little, we're looking for ways of building connections and finding ways to like add things that just make people happy to be on the site. There's
It's
a lot of words. I'm sorry.
No, no, no. This is all excellent. This is all very, very informative and inspiring, I would say, as well. And it's interesting that, when we started off talking about shows and tours and about booking, we got into very quickly about the communities. And so here
Yeah.
we are. Once again, it's the
Yep.
same topic.
It is. It is. It is the same topic. And so much, so much of I don't success is the wrong word. So much of being satisfied with the work that you create is for me at least, and I think I'd say for most people, so much of the satisfaction is finding people who feel inspired by it, and then connecting with people who can then continue to inspire you. And you'll get those artists who they want to live in a vacuum and they're all isolated and like misanthropic and whatever. And that's their art and that's who they want to be. That's great. For the most part, music scenes, music communities are really, really crucial to the growth and evolution of art, and to artists feeling fulfilled with the work that they're doing. And I really think that the online spaces that we have today are not built to foster community. They're built to foster some amount of somewhere between commerce and endorphins. And commerce by itself is enough for a lot of people, and it is what motivates a lot of people. It's not everyone, and I'd say that it's not. I'd even say it's not most people, and I'd also say that a lot of people who are participating in commerce still are really unhappy with it. I think there has to be more, especially if you want to build something that can survive more than one release cycle, especially if you're someone who takes more time between albums and you want to feel confident that there are going to be people there who have, connected with your art in a way that they'll still be there when you come back in a few years. So I think that our mission is largely to foster, to create ways to create these connections to strengthen communities.
Yeah, and again, in terms of the parallels, it's like if I think about bands that go to play shows and then actually actively want to interact with the people that come to see them play. You've got like before and after shows, bands and band members hanging out with people that came to see the music, whether it's at the merch desk or anywhere else. And so in a sense, you've got a similar kind of community going on in theory, where it's like, yeah, you've got the people who are making the music, you've got the people who are buying the music, and then you've got people that want to like have a community where they can talk with each other about the music or about whatever else that inspires them.
Yeah, yeah, and and even if they're not talking with each other, just having some kind of representation where they feel that they're part of it, they're included there is important. We another little detail that can seem subtle at first, but it's meaningful to people. We have a dedicated space for artwork credits, where when you add an album to the site, like you can link to the visual artist who did the cover artwork or the merch. If you have a shirt or a poster or something, you can link to that artist. And if they're on Ampwall, you can link directly to that person or directly to that artwork. And the artist can post the artwork themselves with their own profile. And if they want to sell merch, they can sell their own merch. So just that inclusion, that lifting of somebody who is traditionally othered, traditionally a second class citizen, and saying, like, no, you are part of this music community. That philosophical underpinning, it runs throughout everything we do, and it affects the way we look at things and the way we build things and what we prioritize and how we try to talk to people and where we see ourselves in the future. And it's a subtle, at times subtle differentiator with Bandcamp especially, but I think already it's yielding some really nice results, and over time it only makes things more and more interesting.
Yeah, I'm fascinated. Well, I will definitely I will be joining the Discord imminently.
Awesome.
Just interesting enough, like that model of having Discord, like this other podcast that I do research for, Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex, they have a Discord as well. And that has been a really nice feature in the time that I've been with them, is to the people who are supporting the podcast are on this Discord, and there's lots of interesting people there. And it's like there are people on the Discord who didn't know each other before being a part of that, who've ended up like meeting each other at shows. So it very much like has that
Yeah.
potential for the community aspect of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've had I mean we have a lot of people who have made friends. I mean we have like there's a whole lot of us who are here in New York, and I don't think any of us knew each other ahead of time. And now we go to shows together. Like they come to my birthday party, like this is like we all go out as a group, and like we'll go to see shows, and it's nice. We have people who've done splits together and worked on compilations together, and they contribute to each other's album art. And they discover they have mutual friends that they didn't realize they had, and it's a really nice thing. Really nice community. Of course, like as time goes on, it gets bigger, it gets challenged. Excuse me, it gets challenging to scale those kinds of things. So we're going to have to adapt to the realities of growing, but we'll manage it. We're still a small Discord relative to a lot of others that are out there. So we'll keep growing. And I think a thing that I think about a lot, that, and I know we mentioned, throughout this conversation, we talked about how a lot of what I see as, like pivotal successes that I've had are the result of just groups of people kind of looking for the same thing around the same time. And we talk about when booking shows, and, when, like, I mean, really, it's true for like getting my music released, and, Ampwall and all this. I think like a big thing that I think about a lot is the value of doing good work that you believe in for the sake of doing good work that you believe in, which I think ultimately puts you in a place where you're kind of just like putting yourself out there, and you're putting enough work out into the world, and you're kind of just like casting a wide net to that eventually. I like to believe like you'll find like-minded people, and you'll find other people who are also doing these things. A big part of like, DIY is, a lot of people focus on the why of the yourself of DIY, but for me the important part is the doing it. It's the doing it, and it's not talking about it. It's not it's not DIY. It's DIY, doing it. Just fucking get out there and do it. And so many of the things that I'm proud of that have gone well are the result of just doing it and committing to it, not because I think it's going to be huge, not because I think it's going to be, like take over the world, or make me $1 million. Like it's just because I think it sounds interesting, or I think it sounds cool, or I think it has value, and I think that it's, like it sounds fun, or I don't know, I think I'll learn something. Um, all of this comes back to just doing stuff for the sake of doing it to fulfill yourself. And I think that, if there's like one piece of advice that I could give like literally anyone I mean, especially musicians or artists or people who are trying to accomplish anything in music, but it's true for everything, is just do stuff. Just do stuff. Just do your best. Do your best. Hold yourself accountable. Have high standards for your own work. Seek out the things that suck that you're doing and make them not suck. And just do it. It's the most powerful thing.
Yeah, right on.
Oh yeah.
So I'm going to let you go, but obviously we've talked about Ampwall, but in terms of what you're doing musically, is there anything in particular at the moment that you wanted to mention or promote that you've got going on?
Yeah. I mean, I think you know, Woe is coming off of last few months. We've been playing a lot, touring as much as we can. I think we are probably going to announce a few more dates this year. So we're working on that. The new Glorious Depravity album is coming out, I believe, the beginning of November. I don't have the date, but by the time this airs, it should be fine. And I mean, it's not a huge secret, but yeah. So the new Glorious Depravity album, it's my death metal band with two of the guys from Woe and Doug from Puron and George from Mutilation Rights. So our second album is coming out. It's kind of very American sounding death metal. So really, really excited to have that out. I say that's for fans of Suffocation or Cannibal Corpse, Morbid Angel, just sort of a mishmash of that whole American '90s death metal thing. So yeah, so that's going to be coming out later this year, and we're going to be doing some shows. And then I'm working on some Woe stuff that I'm not quite ready to announce yet, but we have some cool things in the works. So I'm just staying busy.
Ace. Well, Chris, it was really, really cool to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I definitely want to keep talking with you about these various different topics, but that was great. So
Fantastic.
you've set off all kinds of different ideas in my brain, which are going to be percolating away for a while.
Oh yeah, man. Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Happy to talk anytime. It was a lot of fun. Without